Good evening. Welcome back to the channel Sleep Beneath History, my friend. Tonight, we're going to travel slowly into the past. There is no need to hurry. There is no great journey you need to prepare for. You can simply settle down. Let your body become comfortable. Let your breathing become slow. And if you are listening in bed, allow the room around you to become quieter. Tonight, we are going to Madrid. Not the Madrid of today. Not the busy modern city. Not the streets filled with cars and bright electric lights. Instead, we are going much further back. We are going to a Madrid of candlelight. A Madrid of stone streets. Wooden doors. Horse-drawn carriages. Church bells. Quiet courtyards. Grand palaces. Small workshops, and private rooms where wealthy people kept paintings that most ordinary people would never see. Our story will take us into the world of Francisco Goya, a Spanish painter who lived through a remarkable period of change. He saw kings come and go. He saw political power shift. He saw Spain caught between old traditions and new ideas. He painted royal families. He painted ordinary people. He painted scenes of everyday life. He painted dreams. He painted fears. And he painted a woman lying quietly on a bed. That painting would become known as the Naked Maja. Today, it is one of the most recognizable works connected with Goya. But when it was first painted, it was not hanging in a museum. There were no crowds standing in front of it. There was no polished museum floor beneath it. There was no little plaque beside it explaining its history. There was simply a painting, a woman, a bed, a quiet room, and a private owner. For years, the painting existed in a world of wealth and secrecy. Then political events changed everything. The painting was seized. The authorities became interested in it. The Spanish Inquisition became involved, and Goya himself was questioned. A painting that had once been hidden behind closed doors suddenly became part of an official investigation. Tonight we will follow that journey. Slowly, one step at a time, we will begin with Madrid. We will walk through the city. We will meet the young Goya. We will watch his career develop. We will enter the world of wealthy collectors. We will look at the strange history of the word Maja. We will consider the mystery of the woman in the painting. And eventually, we will reach the moment when the authorities asked Goya to explain himself. But we will not rush toward that moment. There is plenty of time. History is a long road. And tonight, we can walk along it slowly. So take another quiet breath. Let your eyes become heavy if you are listening in bed. And imagine that somewhere, far away in time, a church bell is beginning to ring. The sound moves across an old Spanish city. One bell, then another, and then silence. Madrid is waiting. Let us begin. Imagine you are standing in Madrid near the end of the 18th century. It is early evening. The sun has already begun to sink. The walls of the buildings are catching the last warm light. The streets are uneven. They are not smooth roads like the ones we know today. They are made from stone and packed earth. The sound of horses can be heard nearby. A carriage moves slowly around a corner. Its wheels make a soft, uneven rhythm against the street. Club. Club, club. Then the sound becomes quieter. A door opens. Someone steps inside. The door closes. And for a moment, the street becomes still again. Madrid is the capital of Spain. It is a place of contrasts. There are grand buildings. There are small houses. There are wealthy families. There are workers who live very modestly. There are artists, servants, merchants, soldiers, priests, officials, children, old people, people who have lived in Madrid all their lives, and people who have arrived from distant parts of Spain hopping to find work. If you walked through the city during the day, you would hear many sounds. Market sellers calling out, horses moving through the streets, children playing, people talking, tools striking wood, metal being shaped, doors opening and closing, church bells marking the passing hours. But at night the city changes. The voices become softer. Shops close. Families return home. Candles are lit. Meals are finished. And gradually, Madrid becomes quieter. This is the world into which Francisco Goya was born. He was born in 1746. Not in Madrid itself, but in the small village of Fuendetodos in Aragon. His family was not part of the highest level of Spanish society. Goya did not begin life surrounded by royal luxury. He had to become an artist. And becoming a successful artist was not simple. A young painter needed training. He needed teachers. He needed opportunities. And perhaps most importantly, he needed people willing to pay for his work. Art was not simply something an artist made for pleasure. It was also work, a profession, a way to earn a living. A painter needed patrons. A patron was a person with enough money and interest to support an artist. Sometimes that patron was a church. Sometimes a noble family. Sometimes a government official. Sometimes a member of the royal court. The relationship could be very important. A successful patron could introduce an artist to other wealthy people. One commission could lead to another. One portrait could open another door. And slowly, an artist could climb through society. Goya understood this world. He learned how to work within it. But he also developed his own voice. That would become increasingly important as he grew older. For now, though, he was simply a young man trying to find his place. Imagine him as a young artist. He is surrounded by paintings. He studies faces. He studies clothing. He studies light. He learns how paint behaves. He learns how to prepare a canvas. He learns how to mix colors. He learns how to make a face look alive. He learns how to paint fabric. He learns how to show metal. He learns how to suggest sunlight. And he learns something else. He learns that people are never simply faces. A portrait can show wealth. A portrait can show power. A portrait can show age. A portrait can show confidence. It can also show weakness. Goya became very good at seeing these differences. Years later, when he painted powerful people, he did not always make them look perfect. He could show the person beneath the clothing, the person beneath the title, the person beneath the position. That ability would become one of the most interesting parts of his art. But before Goya became famous, Spain itself was changing. And the changes were not always easy. The 18th century was a period of great change across Europe. People were thinking about science, education, government, reason, nature, human society. Some writers believed that people should question old ideas. Some believed that knowledge could improve life. Others were more cautious. They feared that too much change could destroy social order. Spain was part of this wider European conversation. But Spain had its own history. Religion remained deeply important. The monarchy remained powerful. The church had enormous influence. Traditional customs remained part of everyday life. An institution such as the Spanish Inquisition still existed. This created an interesting atmosphere. New ideas could enter Spain. Books could circulate. Artists could study European traditions. Educated people could discuss philosophy. But old systems did not simply disappear. They remained, sometimes quietly, sometimes strongly. This matters when we think about the Maja, because the painting existed inside this complicated world. It was not created in a modern society where people generally expected art to be displayed freely. It belonged to a society where context mattered greatly. Who owned a painting? Where was it displayed? Who was allowed to see it? What was the subject? What did the subject mean? Was it religious? Was it mythological? Was it historical? Was it private? These questions could change how an image was understood. Imagine a painting of the ancient goddess Venus. A nude figure could be presented as part of classical mythology. The viewer could say, "This is not an ordinary woman. This is Venus. She belongs to an old story. She represents beauty. She belongs to the classical tradition." That explanation created distance. It made the nude body part of a larger story. But Goya's Maja did not offer that easy explanation. There was no obvious goddess, no ancient myth, no dramatic story, no sea, no heavenly symbols. Instead, there was a woman lying on a bed. She looks toward the viewer. She seems calm, almost comfortable, and this directness was unusual. The painting did not need a long explanation. The viewer could immediately understand what was being shown. That simplicity made it powerful, and it also made it difficult to place within older artistic traditions. But the painting would not immediately cause a public scandal. For some time, it remained private. That is an important part of the story. The Maja was not initially hanging in a public exhibition. It was not presented to a large audience. It belonged to a private collection. And private collections were their own small worlds. Imagine a wealthy house in Madrid. The outside walls are solid. The entrance is large. Inside, the rooms are spacious. There are servants moving quietly through corridors. There are polished surfaces, furniture made from expensive wood, mirrors, books, decorative objects, and paintings. Many paintings. Some are religious. Some are portraits. Some show landscapes. Some come from earlier centuries. And some show the human body. The owner of such a collection does not necessarily display everything in the same way. Some paintings may hang in public rooms. Others may be kept in private chambers. A guest might be allowed to see one collection, but not another. The owner decides. This was especially important for works that might be considered unsuitable for general viewing. A painting could be admired privately, while being considered inappropriate for public display. That distinction may seem strange today, but it was normal in many wealthy European households. Private rooms had different rules. A powerful man could own something that ordinary people would never see. The collection itself could become a symbol of status. Owning famous paintings showed education. It showed money. It showed taste. It showed connections. And sometimes, it showed that the owner belonged to a world most people could not enter. This brings us to Manuel God. God became one of the most powerful men in Spain. His rise was extraordinary. He moved close to the royal court. He gained political influence. He became a central figure in Spanish government. And with power came wealth. With wealth came collecting. Goda's collection became large and important. Paintings were among his possessions, and the Maja became part of this private world. Imagine the painting inside one of his rooms. The curtains are partly closed. There is soft light. Perhaps candles are burning. The walls are decorated. The floor is quiet beneath your feet. You walk slowly. You see portraits. You see landscapes. You see other works. And then you reach the Maja. You stop. The woman looks directly at you. There is something unusual about that. You are not watching a distant mythological scene. She is not looking away. She does not appear to be embarrassed. She is simply looking. For a modern viewer, this may not seem especially surprising. But in the world of Goya, it was different. The direct gaze creates a relationship. The painting seems to notice the viewer. You are no longer simply looking at an object. You become part of the scene. You stand there. She looks back. And neither of you moves. Of course, the woman is not alive. She is paint, oil, canvas, pigment, but the illusion is strong. The eyes make the painting feel present. That is one reason the Maja has remained so memorable. But the identity of the woman is another mystery. The woman has no name written beside her. There is no note from Goya saying, "This is this particular person." There is no surviving document that settles the matter. Over the years, people have suggested different possibilities. One famous theory connects the woman with the Duchess of Alba. The Duchess was an important figure in Spanish society. She was wealthy, powerful, well-known, and she had connections with the same social world in which Goya moved. Stories about Goya and the Duchess became popular. Some people believed that there was a close relationship between them. Others believed that Goya may have used her as a model. But historians have not been able to prove that the woman in the Maja is the Duchess. Another theory connects the painting with Pepita Tudo. She was closely associated with Manuel Gada. Again, this possibility has attracted attention. But again, certainty is not possible. The honest answer is that we do not know. And that is worth saying clearly. History is not a story where every mystery must have a solution. Sometimes evidence is missing. Sometimes evidence was never created. Sometimes people simply did not write down what happened. Imagine a conversation in Madrid more than 200 years ago. Two people are standing in a room. They are looking at the painting. They know who the woman is. Perhaps they know exactly why Goya painted her. Perhaps they even know who ordered the painting. But they do not realize that centuries later, people will desperately want to know. So they do not write it down. They continue their lives. They grow older. They die. And the information disappears. The painting remains. The mystery remains. That is often how history works. We inherit objects. We inherit documents. We inherit fragments. But not always the complete story. So tonight, we can simply call her the Maja. The woman in the painting. The woman who looks back. We do not need to give her a name that history cannot prove. There is something peaceful about allowing the mystery to remain. The word itself is interesting. Maja was associated with a woman from the lower or working social world of Madrid who had a particular style and manner. The word could suggest a woman who was fashionable, lively, confident, and connected with popular Madrid culture. There were also male versions of the term. A man could be called a majo. These figures became part of Spanish visual culture. Artists liked to depict them. They wore distinctive clothing. They had recognizable attitudes. They belonged to the streets rather than the royal palace. They represented something local, something Spanish, something connected with Madrid itself. So when we hear the word Maja, we should not imagine only the word nude. The word carries a cultural meaning. It suggests a type of woman, a particular social image, a certain confidence, a certain way of dressing and behaving. Goya understood this world. He had painted ordinary people. He had observed street life. He knew the difference between palace culture and popular culture. This gave his work a special character. He could move between worlds. He could paint a queen. Then he could paint a street seller. He could paint a noble family. Then he could paint ordinary people. And the Maja belongs partly to this interest in Spanish identity. The painting does not look like a distant Italian Venus. She feels closer, more immediate, more Spanish. Her presence is simple. Her face is direct. Her pose is relaxed. And her setting feels like a private room rather than a mythological world. Perhaps this was part of what made the painting so unusual. It brought the nude into a recognizable modern setting. Not ancient Greece, not ancient Rome, not heaven, not mythology. Madrid, a woman, a bed, a room, and a painter. There is another painting, the clothed Maja. It is closely connected with the nude version. The same woman appears to be lying in almost the same position. But this time she is dressed. The contrast is striking. Imagine seeing the clothed painting first. The woman lies comfortably. She looks toward you. She appears relaxed. The colors are rich. The fabric surrounds her. Then imagine the second painting. The same basic pose. But the clothing is gone. The effect is immediate. The two paintings create a visual conversation. One covers. One reveals. One hides. One shows. And yet the woman's expression remains calm. She is not transformed into a different personality. She is still looking, still resting, still present. This raises many questions. Why were both paintings made? Were they intended to be displayed together? Was one used to conceal the other? Did they have a particular private purpose? Historians have proposed different explanations. But not every popular story about the two paintings can be proven. What we know is that the paintings were closely associated with each other and with Goya's collection. Their relationship is one of the most fascinating features of the story. Because the clothed painting also tells us something about how images can change meaning. Clothing is not only fabric. In art, clothing can represent social position, respectability, identity, wealth, gender, occupation, power. When clothing disappears, the meaning can change. And when the same face remains, the viewer becomes even more aware of the difference. It is the same person, or at least it appears to be. The same gaze, the same body, the same room. But one version follows a familiar social expectation. The other challenges it. Perhaps that contrast was intentional. Perhaps it was playful. Perhaps it was private. We cannot know for certain. But it gives the paintings a special relationship. To understand why Goya's name became so important, we need to step backward again. He was not born famous. He had to work. He traveled. He studied. He failed at some things. He tried again. He learned from other painters. He gradually gained commissions. His reputation grew. And eventually, he became connected with the Spanish royal court. This was a major achievement. Court painters occupied an important position. They were not simply decorators. They created official images of powerful people. A portrait could become a political object. When a king's portrait was sent somewhere, it represented the king. When a royal family was painted together, the image could communicate stability, wealth, family, authority. The painter, therefore, had an important responsibility. He needed to show the person in a flattering way. But Goya had an unusual eye. He could make people look human, sometimes almost too human. This became especially noticeable in his portraits. Faces have weight. Aging is visible. Expressions are not always idealized. People look like people. This realism made his portraits powerful. It also showed his skill. He could paint silk. He could paint lace. He could paint metals. He could paint skin. He could paint hair. He could paint the soft reflection of light on fabric. And he could do all of this without making the painting feel lifeless. Goya was becoming one of the leading artists of his country. But his world was changing. The royal court was changing. Spain was changing. Europe was changing. And the quiet painting in Goya's collection was waiting. Let us return to that room. It is evening. Perhaps the servants have finished their work. The house is quiet. A candle burns. The flame moves slightly when air enters through a door. There are shadows on the wall. The painting hangs quietly. Imagine standing several steps away. You do not need to walk closer. Simply look. The woman lies on the bed. Her arms rest behind her head. Her body is arranged horizontally. The background is relatively simple. There is no large dramatic story. The painting does not demand movement. It asks you to look. And look. And look again. The longer you look, the more unusual the face becomes. Not because the expression is dramatic. Quite the opposite. It is calm, almost neutral. The woman does not appear to be smiling. She does not look frightened. She does not seem embarrassed. She simply meets the viewer's eyes. That directness creates a quiet tension. And yet the scene itself remains peaceful. There is no movement, no violence, no action, only stillness. Perhaps this is why the painting works so well as an image. It captures a moment that feels suspended. The woman could have been there for a minute, or an hour, or forever. The room has no clock. The painting gives us no exact time. And so the viewer is left with a strange feeling. The world outside continues. Madrid continues. People walk. Horses move. Governments change. But inside this painted room, time has stopped. The woman remains. One of the most important things to remember is that the Maja was not originally made for public viewing in the way we understand museums today. This changes the story. Imagine the difference between showing a painting to 5 close friends and showing it to 5,000 strangers. The same painting could feel completely different. A private collector could decide who was allowed into a room. A public institution could not do that as easily. In a private room, the owner controlled the atmosphere. The owner controlled the audience. The owner controlled the meaning. The painting could be part of a personal world. Perhaps it was discussed quietly. Perhaps guests admired it. Perhaps people simply looked at it and moved on. We do not know exactly how visitors reacted. But we know that wealthy European collectors could own works that were never intended for ordinary public audiences. This is important because the word obscene can make the story sound simpler than it really was. The issue was not simply, people saw a naked woman and became shocked. The situation was more complicated. There was a long European tradition of nude painting. The problem was connected with context, with morality, with the social status of the owner, with the intended audience, with religious concerns, and with the authority of the institutions that judged such things. The Maja existed at the intersection of all these worlds. Art, private life, wealth, politics, religion, and power. That is why its story became so much larger than the canvas itself. Now we come to one of the most important parts of the story. The Spanish Inquisition. The institution had existed for centuries before Goya was born. Its purpose and methods changed over time. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Spain was changing rapidly. The Enlightenment had influenced educated society. Political ideas were shifting. France had experienced revolution. Napoleon had risen. Europe was becoming unstable. Yet the Inquisition still existed. Its authority was connected with religious and moral concerns. It could investigate ideas, books, practices, images, and people. For an ordinary person, being connected with such an investigation could be deeply worrying. For a famous painter, it could also be dangerous. Goya understood the power of institutions. He had spent years working near the royal court. He knew that powerful people could help an artist. He also knew that powerful people could make life difficult. So imagine the atmosphere when the Maja eventually came under official attention. The painting had been private. Now it was being examined. Someone had decided that its existence required explanation. The canvas could not explain itself. So the questions moved toward its owner, and eventually toward Goya. The story of the painting cannot be separated from politics. Manuel God had become extremely powerful. But power is rarely permanent. Political conditions changed. Spain became caught in the larger conflict involving Napoleon's France. The royal family became deeply involved in political struggles. God lost his position. The old order began to break apart. His property was seized, and among the objects connected with his household were paintings. This changed the Maja's life completely. Before this moment, it had belonged to a private world. Now it was part of an official collection of seized property. Officials could inspect it. They could record it. They could question its history. The painting had lost the protection of privacy. It had entered the public world, and the public world could be much less forgiving. Imagine the painting being removed from its familiar room. The walls are empty. A space remains where it once hung. Perhaps nobody notices immediately. Perhaps another painting takes its place. The house continues. People continue moving. But the Maja has begun a new journey. It is now an object of official attention, and that journey will eventually bring it to Goya himself. Years pass. Then in 1815, Goya is summoned. He is asked about the paintings. The questions are direct. Did he paint them? Why did he paint them? Who asked him to paint them? What was the purpose? These are not simply artistic questions. They are questions of responsibility. Imagine sitting in a room while someone reads such questions aloud. The room may be quiet. The walls may be plain. There may be papers on a table. The person asking the questions may be formal. You are expected to answer. You cannot simply say, "It is only a painting," because the institution asking the questions does not see it as only a painting. It sees an object that may have violated moral standards. Goya is now older. He has lived through many changes. He has worked for royalty. He has survived political uncertainty. He has seen the French invasion. He has experienced personal difficulties. And now an old painting has returned to him. A painting created years earlier. A painting that had spent much of its life in private. A painting that has suddenly become a problem. What did Goya say? This is where history becomes frustrating. We do not have a complete record of his response. The questions are known. The circumstances are known. But the full conversation has not survived. We cannot place exact words into his mouth. So we should not invent them. Instead, we can sit with the silence. Goya is questioned. The painting waits. The authorities want an explanation. And history gives us only fragments. Perhaps he answered carefully. Perhaps he explained who had commissioned the work. Perhaps he gave the expected information. Perhaps he tried to avoid unnecessary trouble. Whatever happened, the moment passed. The world continued. And Goya continued. Imagine Goya later that evening. He returns home. The city outside is quiet. He is older now. His hair is gray. His hands have spent decades holding brushes. He has painted hundreds of faces. He has seen people change. He has seen governments rise. He has seen governments fall. He has seen Spain transformed. And now he has been questioned about a painting from his earlier life. Perhaps he thinks about it. Perhaps he does not. We cannot know. Maybe he simply returns to his work. Artists have a strange relationship with time. They spend hours creating something. Then the painting can survive longer than they do. A person may paint a portrait in a few weeks, but the portrait can survive for centuries. The person grows old. The portrait remains young. The person dies. The portrait continues to look at people. That is what happened with the Maja. Goya could never have known exactly what the painting would become. He could not have known that people centuries later would stand in front of it. He could not have known that students would study it. He could not have known that museums would protect it. He could not have known that the identity of the woman would become a famous mystery. He could not have known that the painting would eventually be regarded as one of his great works. He simply painted it. And then time took over. There's something almost dreamlike about looking at an old portrait. The person inside it never changes. Imagine someone painted in 1795. That person might have been 20 years old. Perhaps they were worried about money. Perhaps they were thinking about marriage. Perhaps they had children. Perhaps they were worried about illness. Perhaps they were excited about the future. We do not know. But in the painting, they remain 20. Forever. The Maja has a similar quality. The woman does not grow older. Her hair does not turn gray. Her expression does not change. Her body does not move. She remains exactly as Goya painted her. For more than 2 centuries. And every person who looks at her enters that same frozen moment. A person from 1815. A person from 1915. A person from 2015. A person today. All meet the same face. That is one of the quiet powers of portraiture. It allows a person who has been gone for generations to remain visually present. The Maja is not simply an image of a woman. She is also an image of time. She shows us how people once imagined beauty, how artists once painted skin, how rooms were represented, how private life entered art, and how one painting could become a historical document. While the painting rested in private spaces, life continued outside. Farmers worked. Merchants traded. Children grew up. Families gathered for meals. Women worked inside homes and businesses. Men worked in workshops and fields. Soldiers traveled. Priests held services. Markets opened. Markets closed. The seasons changed. Summer became autumn. Autumn became winter. Winter became spring. A person living through these years might not have cared about the painting at all. They might never have seen it. They might never have heard Goya's name. They might have spent their entire life without entering a palace. This reminds us how small the world of elite art collecting really was. For most people, daily life was much more practical. They worried about food, rent, work, family, weather, health, religion, and survival. A painting in a wealthy man's private room belonged to another world. Yet centuries later, the painting can tell us something about both worlds. It tells us about wealth. It tells us about private collecting. It tells us about elite culture. It tells us about art. And indirectly, it reminds us that many people could never have entered that room. The distance between the worlds was enormous, but both existed at the same time. The rich collector looked at paintings. The worker carried goods. The artist painted. The servant cleaned the room. The priest rang the bell. The child played in the street. All of them were living inside the same historical moment. Let us pause here. Imagine Madrid at night. The year is somewhere around the beginning of the 19th century. The city is dark. A few candles shine through windows. The streets are almost empty. There is a faint smell of smoke from fireplaces. A dog moves along a narrow street. Somewhere behind a wall, a family is talking quietly. A horse shifts its weight in a stable. A church bell sounds. Then silence. You walk slowly. There is no modern noise. No engines. No electric signs. No bright advertisements. Only darkness and small points of light. You pass a closed shop. Then another. You pass a wooden door. Behind it, someone is sleeping. You continue. Eventually, you reach a large residence. The building is silent. Inside, servants have finished their evening tasks. Rooms are dark, but one room still has a candle. And inside that room is a painting. The Maja. She is still there. She does not know that one day her image will travel around the world. She does not know that people will write books about her. She does not know that historians will argue about her identity. She does not know that her painting will be called a masterpiece. She simply looks outward, and the candlelight rests softly across the canvas. Then the flame moves. The shadow changes. For just a moment, it almost seems as though the woman has moved. But she has not. The painting remains still. The night continues. And Madrid sleeps. Why did the painting cause concern? This question has no single answer. The nude body itself was not unknown in European art. That is important. There were centuries of nude painting before Goya. Artists had studied the human body. Collectors owned classical works. Painters created mythological nudes. So the issue was not simply the presence of a naked body. Instead, the Maja presented that body in a particular way. She appeared to be a real woman. She was not hidden behind a myth. She did not appear to be a goddess. She was not part of a religious story. She was simply present. And she looked directly at the viewer. That directness could make the image feel more personal. perhaps even more intimate. And in a society where public morality was taken seriously, such an image could attract concern. The setting mattered. The audience mattered. The owner mattered. The circumstances mattered. Everything around the painting mattered. This is one reason historical art can be difficult to understand from a modern perspective. We may look at an object and see one thing. People in the past may have seen something else. Neither perspective is necessarily simple. The painting itself is unchanged. The viewer changes. And when the viewer changes, the meaning changes. Another question remains. What did Goya intend? Was he trying to challenge convention? Was he simply fulfilling a commission? Was he painting for a private collector? Was he interested in beauty? Was he interested in the human body? Was he experimenting with the relationship between viewer and subject? Was there a personal reason? Again, we cannot know completely. Artists are often asked what their work means. But sometimes even artists do not have one clear answer. A painting can begin with one intention and end with another meaning. Goya may have had a specific purpose, but later generations have added their own interpretations. That is normal. Art changes as people look at it. The Maja has been interpreted as sensual, bold, private, modern, traditional, provocative, beautiful, mysterious. Each interpretation reveals something about the person doing the looking. Perhaps that is why the painting remains interesting. It does not tell us exactly what to think. It allows us to look and then wonder. The Inquisition's interest in the Maja became part of the painting's legend. Once an artwork has been connected with an official investigation, people remember. The story becomes larger. The painting is no longer simply a portrait of a woman. It becomes the painting that was questioned, the painting connected with Goya, the painting connected with God, the painting connected with the Inquisition, the painting whose model remains unknown. Every layer adds another story. But we should remember something important. The painting itself did not change. The same canvas remained. The same woman remained. The same quiet gaze remained. The controversy grew around it. That is often how historical objects become famous. Their original purpose may have been simple, but later events add layers. A sword becomes a royal sword. A house becomes a historical house. A letter becomes a famous letter. A painting becomes a controversial painting. And eventually, the later story can become more famous than the original object. The Maja is a perfect example. Now imagine time moving forward. Slowly, 1 year, then another. The world changes. Old people die. Children become adults. New children are born. Fashion changes. Buildings are repaired. Others are demolished. New streets appear. Old customs disappear. Political ideas change. The Spanish Empire changes. Europe changes. Art changes. And the Maja continues. The woman still lies on the bed. Her gaze remains the same. Her body remains the same. Her surroundings remain the same. Time moves around her, but not through her. She becomes a kind of doorway. When people look at her, they are looking backward. They are seeing an image created in another century. A century when candles were common. A century before photography. A century before cinema. A century before radio. A century before television. A century before the internet. The painting is therefore not only a picture. It is a survivor. It has crossed the boundary between worlds. It was created in a time when images were made by hand, and it eventually entered a world filled with machines. Yet it remained. Oil paint, canvas, human hands, human eyes, a simple image, still here. Think about Goya's hands. A painter's hands spend years doing small movements, holding a brush, mixing pigment, cleaning tools, stretching canvas, adding one stroke, then another. Sometimes the brush touches the surface gently, sometimes more strongly. The artist steps backward, looks, moves forward, changes something, steps back again, looks again. A painting is built slowly, layer by layer, minute by minute, hour by hour. Perhaps Goya worked on the Maja in this way. Perhaps he stood in front of the canvas and studied the woman's face. Perhaps he adjusted the light. Perhaps he changed the color. Perhaps he painted and repainted parts of the body. We do not know exactly how long it took, but we know that the final image appears effortless. The woman simply lies there. That simplicity may be deceptive. Good paintings often look easy when they are finished, but behind the calm surface are hundreds of decisions. Where should the light fall? How much detail is necessary? How should the body be arranged? How should the face look? How much of the background should be visible? Where should the viewer's eye go? Goya made all of these choices, and then he left the painting behind. Perhaps the most memorable part of the Maja is her gaze. Let us think about it for a moment. She is looking toward us, not past us, not away from us, toward us. This is simple, but it changes everything. When a portrait looks away, the viewer can remain outside. We observe. The subject does not seem aware of us. But when a painted person looks directly at us, the relationship changes. We become visible. We become part of the imagined world. The woman appears aware of the viewer, and that creates a strange kind of stillness. She does not speak. She does not move, but she seems present. Perhaps this is why the painting feels surprisingly modern. Modern photography often captures direct eye contact. Modern portraits often ask the subject to look at the camera. But Goya achieved something similar with paint. The woman looks outward, and the viewer looks back. 2 centuries disappear for a moment. A person standing in a museum today can feel as though the woman is looking directly at them. That is a powerful illusion, and it is one of the reasons the painting has survived in people's memories. At the beginning, the Maja belonged to privacy. That is perhaps the most important contrast in the whole story. Private, then public, hidden, then displayed, protected, then questioned, owned, then confiscated, and eventually preserved. The painting traveled through all these states. Its meaning changed each time. In a private room, it might have been a personal object. Under investigation, it became evidence. In a museum, it became cultural heritage. This transformation tells us something about museums. A museum does more than preserve objects. It changes how we see them. A painting inside a private bedroom can feel intimate. The same painting behind a museum barrier feels historical. The museum tells us, this belongs to the past. This is important. Look at it. Study it. Protect it. The object becomes part of a larger story. The Maja is now surrounded by history. Goya's name. Spain. The royal court. God. The Inquisition. The 19th century. The history of European art. The museum visitor sees all these things at once, but the painting itself remains simple. A woman, a bed, a gaze. Let us return to her one final time before we continue. Imagine that you know nothing about her. You do not know the theories. You do not know the name of Goya. You do not know about God. You do not know about the Inquisition. You simply see a woman painted more than 200 years ago. What do you notice? Perhaps the expression first, then the pose, then the light, then the strange directness. She does not seem like a historical figure. She seems like a person. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about the painting. The mystery does not require a solution. The woman does not need a name. She can simply remain an anonymous human presence. Someone who existed in a world that has almost completely disappeared. A world of candlelight, horse carts, long dresses, wooden furniture, handwritten letters, painted portraits, private collections, and slow journeys. The woman belongs to that world, and yet she also belongs to ours, because she is still here, still looking, still waiting, still inviting the viewer to pause. Now let us leave the room again. The candle is almost finished. The flame is smaller. The house is quiet. Outside, Madrid is sleeping. A servant has closed the last door. The horses are resting. The streets are empty. The night air moves gently between the buildings. A church stands in darkness. The city seems almost timeless. But it is not. Time is always moving, even when nobody notices. Tomorrow will come. The sun will rise. People will wake. Bread will be baked. Markets will open. Doors will be unlocked. Children will go outside. And the painting will still be there, waiting, quietly, for another visitor, another conversation, another question, another century. And perhaps that is where we should pause tonight. Not at the trial, not at the controversy, but here, in the quiet, with the painting resting behind its closed doors. Because history does not always need to be loud. Sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that begin with silence. A painting, a room, a woman, a painter, a powerful owner, and an institution that would eventually ask, why does this exist? The answer would become part of history, but the painting would remain silent. And so, for now, we can leave it there, in the soft candlelight, in old Madrid, while the city slowly sleeps, and while the centuries wait. We will continue our journey. There is much more to discover. The rise of God, the political world surrounding the royal court, the changing face of Spain, the relationship between Goya and the powerful people around him, the mystery of the Duchess of Alba, the story of Pepita Tudo, the changing meaning of the word Maja, the arrival of war, the fall of God, the seizure of his collection, the investigation, the Inquisition, Goya's summons, and finally, the strange afterlife of a painting that once belonged to a private room. But none of that needs to happen quickly. For now, let the old streets become quiet. Let the candle become dim. Let the painting fade gently into the darkness. And let Madrid sleep. For a little while longer. Good night. And when we return, we will open another door. Let us open that door now. Slowly. There is no need to hurry. The night in Madrid has passed. Morning has arrived. The streets are beginning to wake. And somewhere inside the city, people are already beginning another ordinary day. A baker is preparing bread. A servant is opening shutters. A horse is being led into the street. A shopkeeper is arranging goods. A church bell rings somewhere in the distance. And inside the homes of wealthy families, another kind of day is beginning. A day of meetings, letters, visitors, political conversations, and decisions that may affect thousands of people. This is the world of Manuel God. To understand what happened to Goya's painting, we need to understand the man who owned it. God was not born into the highest level of Spanish nobility. His family came from Badajoz in southwestern Spain. He was born in 1767. That meant he was considerably younger than Goya. When Goya was already building his artistic career, Goya was still a young man. His rise would be remarkably fast. He entered royal service while still quite young. And slowly, through a combination of ability, opportunity, and royal favor, he moved closer to the center of power. Imagine the Spanish royal court at this time. It is a different world from the streets outside. The rooms are larger. The clothing is more elaborate. People pay attention to titles. They pay attention to manners. They pay attention to who enters a room. They pay attention to who speaks to whom. A small gesture can carry meaning. A conversation can lead to a new position. A friendship can become politically important. And a person who gains the confidence of the royal family can rise very quickly. God did exactly that. He became close to King Charles IV and Queen Maria Luisa. His influence grew. His responsibilities grew. His wealth grew. And eventually, he became one of the most powerful men in Spain. For some people, his rise was impressive. For others, it was deeply troubling. Power always creates opinions. Those who benefit from a powerful person tend to praise him. Those who lose influence may dislike him. Those who fear change may distrust him. And those who simply dislike seeing one person become too powerful may become suspicious. God, therefore, lived in a world where admiration and criticism followed him closely. Yet he also developed a taste for art. And this brings us back to the painting. Because the Maja did not simply appear in history by accident. It entered the collection of a man who lived at the center of Spanish political life. Goya's home became a place where art and power came together. Imagine walking through one of his rooms. There are paintings on the walls. Some are large. Some are small. Some are old. Some are newer. There are works by famous European artists. There are portraits. There are religious scenes. And there are paintings intended for private enjoyment. The Maja is somewhere among them. Perhaps it is not the first painting you notice. Perhaps another large painting catches your attention. Perhaps a portrait draws your eye. Then gradually, you notice the woman. She is lying quietly. Her eyes meet yours. And you stop. There is no sound from the painting. No explanation. No title. Only the image. It is easy to imagine that a person standing in that room might have wondered about her. Who was she? Why was she painted? Why is she looking directly at me? Was this meant to be beautiful? Was it meant to be playful? Was it meant to be private? Perhaps the visitor knew the answer. Perhaps God knew. Perhaps Goya knew. Perhaps several people knew. But those people are gone now. Their private conversations have disappeared. And the painting remains. This is one of the strange things about private collections. They preserve objects. but they do not always preserve the conversations that happened around those objects. A painting can survive. The voices around it disappear. So today, when we look at the Maja, we are trying to reconstruct a conversation that may have taken place more than 2 centuries ago. We look at the canvas. We look at old records. We study letters. We examine ownership. We compare portraits. We look for clues. But the final answer remains out of reach. Perhaps that is exactly what Gado's private room was like. Full of things that made sense to the people who lived there, and mysterious to everyone who came later. Let us stay with Gade for a little longer, because his story is important. He was not simply a wealthy collector. He was a political figure. His relationship with the royal family placed him in a position of enormous influence. He could make decisions. He could negotiate. He could appoint people. He could influence policy. He could move through the highest levels of Spanish society. And he could collect works of art. His life, therefore, gives us a glimpse into the world surrounding the Maja. Imagine an evening at his residence. Guests arrive. Carriages stop outside. Doors open. Servants greet visitors. Cloaks are removed. People enter warm rooms. Conversations begin. Some guests discuss politics. Others discuss court gossip. Someone may talk about a recent painting. Someone else may talk about France. Another person may discuss a royal event. And somewhere nearby, perhaps in a private room, hangs the Maja. Most of the guests may never see it. Only certain people may be invited. This is important. The painting's original audience was probably much smaller than the audience it has today. Today, a museum can receive thousands of visitors. People from many countries can see the same painting. They can stand in front of it for a few minutes. They can take notes. They can read about it. They can discuss it online. But in Gade's world, the painting belonged to a much smaller circle. It was part of private life. And private life was very different. A powerful man could choose what to display. He could choose who entered. He could choose what remained hidden. That power was part of wealth. It was also part of status. And the Maja existed inside that protected space. For several years at least. Now we come to one of the most famous names connected with the Maja. The Duchess of Alba. Her full name was Maria del Pilar Teresa Cayetana de Silva y Alvarez de Toledo. She belonged to one of Spain's most important aristocratic families. She was wealthy. She was famous. She was socially powerful. And she lived in the same Madrid world that Goya knew. This connection has encouraged generations of people to imagine a romantic story. Perhaps Goya painted the Duchess. Perhaps she was his model. Perhaps there was a secret relationship. Perhaps the Maja was a private portrait disguised as something else. These ideas have become part of the painting's legend. But history requires caution. A popular story is not automatically a proven fact. There are reasons people have connected Goya and the Duchess. There are similarities that people have noticed between the face of the Maja and portraits of the Duchess. There are records showing that Goya worked for members of her family. And Goya did make portraits of the Duchess. So the connection is real. But that does not prove that she was the model for the nude painting. This distinction matters. We can say, Goya knew the Duchess. Goya painted her. The Duchess belonged to the social world surrounding him. But we cannot confidently say, the Duchess is definitely the woman in the Maja. That remains uncertain. And perhaps this uncertainty makes the story more peaceful. We do not need to force the painting into a romantic legend. we can allow the evidence to remain incomplete. Imagine the Duchess walking through Madrid. She is surrounded by servants. Her clothing announces her status. People recognize her. She is not an anonymous person. Her name carries weight. And yet, if she really was the model for the Maja, the painting presents her in a completely different way. Not dressed in aristocratic clothing. Not surrounded by servants. Not standing inside a grand palace. Instead, lying quietly on a bed. That contrast is fascinating. The Duchess represented rank. The Maja represents privacy. The Duchess belonged to public aristocratic life. The Maja belongs to an intimate room. Perhaps this contrast is one reason people found the theory so attractive. But attraction is not proof. And so we leave the question open. Let us imagine Goya meeting the Duchess. Perhaps he arrives at her residence carrying his materials. Perhaps he has been asked to create a portrait. A servant opens the door. Goya enters. He is greeted. The Duchess sits for him. He studies her face. He notices the shape of her eyes, the position of her head, the way the light falls across her clothing. He begins to paint. This is the ordinary work of a portrait artist. But there is something important here. A painter must spend time with the person being painted. A portrait cannot usually be completed without close observation. The artist sees the subject from different angles. He learns the face. He notices small details. He watches expressions. He studies posture. And over time, the painter may become familiar with the person. This does not necessarily mean romance. It simply means professional closeness. Yet later generations often turn such relationships into stories. The famous artist and the beautiful Duchess. The powerful woman and the painter. The private painting. The secret identity. These stories are attractive. They give the painting drama. But the real history is quieter. Goya was a professional artist. The Duchess was an important patron and subject. They belonged to the same social world. That much is clear. Everything beyond that requires caution. And tonight, we can let the mystery remain. Another woman enters the story. Her name was Pepita Tudo. She was closely connected with Manuel Gade. She became an important figure in the stories surrounding the Maja. Some later accounts have suggested that she may have been the model. The idea is understandable. God owned the paintings. Pepita Tudo was connected with him. And the Maja belonged to a private part of his collection. So people naturally began to connect the pieces. But again, the evidence does not allow us to say with certainty that Pepita was the woman. This is a recurring pattern in the history of the painting. A clue appears. Someone proposes a theory. The theory is repeated. Over time, the theory becomes famous. Eventually, people begin to remember the theory as though it were proven. But history is more careful. A theory remains a theory until the evidence supports it strongly enough. So we should keep the mystery alive. Perhaps the woman was Pepita. Perhaps she was the Duchess. Perhaps she was another woman. Perhaps Goya created an idealized figure from several sources. Perhaps the identity was never important to the original owner. Perhaps the painting was never intended to be a portrait at all. We simply do not know. And perhaps that uncertainty is better than a false certainty. Let us think about the artist again. When Goya looked at the woman he was painting, what did he see? Perhaps he saw the arrangement of light. Perhaps he saw the shape of the body. Perhaps he saw the face. Perhaps he was thinking about earlier paintings. Perhaps he was thinking about Spanish women. Perhaps he was thinking about private beauty. Perhaps he was simply fulfilling an assignment. Artists do not always work with one single idea. A painting can be a mixture of many thoughts. Skill, memory, tradition, commission, curiosity, experiment, and chance. Goya had studied earlier masters. He knew the European tradition of the nude. He knew works by artists such as Velázquez and Titian. He understood how earlier painters had presented the female body. But he did something different. His Maja feels closer, more direct, less distant. The woman does not appear to belong to mythology. She belongs to the room, and the viewer belongs to the room too. This is one of the quiet innovations of the painting. It does not need to shout. It simply changes the relationship between the viewer and the subject. The woman looks back, and suddenly we become aware of ourselves. Many paintings tell stories. A battle, a religious miracle, a royal wedding, a myth, a death, a victory, a journey. The viewer can follow the action. The Maja is different. There is almost no story. Nothing is happening. She is lying down. That is all. And yet this lack of action gives the painting a special kind of calm. There is no beginning, no middle, no ending. The moment simply exists. This makes the painting almost dreamlike. Imagine waking in the middle of the night. The room is dark. You are half awake. You see the shape of a curtain, the edge of a chair, a small amount of moonlight. Nothing is happening. But because everything is still, every detail becomes noticeable. The Maja has something of that feeling. Nothing dramatic happens. And because nothing happens, the viewer has time to look, time to notice, time to wonder. This is one reason the painting has remained so powerful. It does not demand a quick response. It invites a slow one. And perhaps that is why we can spend so much time talking about it. The bed itself is also important. A bed is a private object. It belongs inside a home. It is connected with rest, sleep, illness, birth, death, love, private life. A bed is rarely a public place. So when Goya places the woman there, he creates a sense of intimacy. This is not a public street. It is not a palace ceremony. It is not a religious building. It is a bedroom-like setting. The viewer therefore feels as though they are looking into a private moment. That feeling may have contributed to the painting's controversial reputation. The image was not simply about the nude body. It was about the private world around that body. The bed makes the viewer feel closer, and the woman's gaze makes the viewer feel noticed. Together, these elements create an unusual relationship. You are looking. She is looking. And the room is silent. Who actually saw the Maja during its early years? This is difficult to know. The painting belonged to a private collection. Some people certainly saw it. Guests, friends, collectors, perhaps artists, perhaps members of the court. But ordinary people would probably never have entered the room. Imagine living in Madrid at that time. You work in a shop. You walk through the city every day. You hear rumors about wealthy people. You see carriages passing. You know the names of powerful men. But you have never seen their private rooms. You may never have seen one of Goya's most famous paintings. You may not even know it exists. This is the strange difference between cultural importance and everyday experience. Something can be enormously valuable without being widely known. The Maja was important to its owners, but it was not yet a world-famous masterpiece. That would come later. Much later. The peaceful private life of the painting could not last forever. Spain was moving toward crisis. Across Europe, Napoleon's power was growing. France had already experienced enormous political change. The French Revolution had transformed European politics. Monarchies were watching France carefully. Wars were spreading. Alliances were changing. Spain found itself caught between powerful forces. God was increasingly involved in these difficult political circumstances. His decisions became controversial. His enemies grew. The royal family became increasingly unpopular. And eventually, the political structure around him began to collapse. For a while, the Maja remained simply a painting. But history was moving toward it. The painting could not remain outside politics forever. Its owner was political. His property was political. His enemies were political. And when his position collapsed, his collection would be affected. The private room would open. The doors would no longer protect the paintings. The objects inside would become part of a much larger struggle. And the quiet woman on the bed would begin the next stage of her journey. But that is where we will pause. For tonight, we have walked slowly through the world of God. We have met the Duchess of Alba. We have heard the name of Pepita Tudo. We have considered the mystery of the woman. We have looked at the bed, the gaze, the private room, and the small world of wealthy collectors. Outside, the political storm is gathering. But inside the room, the painting remains calm. Still, silent, unchanged. The candle burns low. The night returns. Madrid becomes quiet again. And the woman continues to look outward. She does not know that Gaudi's power will soon fall. She does not know that his collection will be seized. She does not know that officials will examine her. She does not know that the Inquisition will eventually ask questions. And she certainly does not know that centuries later, people will still be wondering who she was. For now, she simply rests. And we can leave her there, in the quiet room, under the soft light, while history slowly moves toward her. Good night. And when we continue, Gaudi's world will begin to collapse. The private room will no longer be private, and the Maja will begin her long journey into the hands of the authorities. Morning came to Madrid again. The city woke as it always did. Bread was prepared. Doors were opened. Horses were brought into the streets. People walked toward their work. In the markets, voices slowly grew louder. For most people, it was another ordinary day. But beyond the ordinary streets, something much larger was changing. The political world of Spain was becoming unstable. The old order was beginning to shake. For years, Manuel God had stood close to the center of power. He had been trusted by the royal family. He had held important offices. He had gathered wealth. He had gathered enemies. And he had become one of the most recognizable figures in Spanish public life. But power can be fragile. A person may appear secure for years. Then suddenly, everything can change. Gaudi's position had become increasingly difficult. Spain was dealing with the growing power of Napoleon's France. The relationship between Spain and France had changed several times. There had been cooperation. There had been war. There had been treaties. There had been alliances. And there had been suspicion. For ordinary people, these political changes could feel distant. A farmer in the countryside might not understand every treaty. A shopkeeper in Madrid might not know every detail of a diplomatic argument. But politics eventually reaches ordinary life. Prices can change. Taxes can change. Soldiers can be called away. Food can become harder to obtain. Rumors spread. People begin to worry. And when people worry, they begin to look for someone to blame. God became one of those people. His enemies accused him of many things. Some believed he had too much influence over the king and queen. Some disliked his relationship with France. Others disliked his rapid rise. Others simply disliked the idea of one man becoming so powerful. Political cartoons and written criticism helped spread negative images of him. His reputation became worse. The man who had once seemed almost untouchable was becoming increasingly vulnerable. And somewhere in his residences, his paintings remained, quietly hanging on walls, waiting. The Maja did not understand politics. A painting cannot understand politics, but paintings can become connected to political lives. And this one was about to do exactly that. To understand the atmosphere around the Spanish royal family, imagine one of their great residences. The rooms are large. The ceilings are high. The walls are decorated. There are portraits of earlier kings. There are religious paintings. There are objects brought from different parts of Europe. Servants move through the corridors. Officials arrive with documents. Messengers carry letters. And behind many closed doors, people discuss the future. The royal world may appear calm from the outside, but inside, decisions are being made. The king is aging. The queen is powerful. God is influential. The Prince Ferdinand has his own supporters. Different groups compete for influence. And beneath all of this is the pressure coming from Napoleon. It is a complicated situation. Perhaps too complicated to understand from a single person's point of view. But history rarely feels complicated to the people living through it. They simply wake up each morning and deal with whatever has happened. A rumor arrives. Then another. Someone has been dismissed. Someone has been arrested. Someone has been promoted. A letter has arrived from France. A troop movement has been reported. A political meeting has taken place. And gradually, the atmosphere becomes heavier. People begin to sense that something is coming. Yet ordinary life continues. This is one of the strange things about historical change. Major events rarely begin with the whole world stopping. People still eat breakfast. Children still play. Shopkeepers still open their doors. Artists still paint. Servants still clean rooms. People fall in love. People argue. People sleep. And somewhere in the middle of all this, history changes direction. One of the major figures in this political struggle was Ferdinand, the heir to the Spanish throne. Ferdinand had a difficult relationship with his parents. He also disliked God. Many people who opposed God gathered around Ferdinand. The situation became increasingly tense. There were accusations, rumors, political maneuvering, and distrust. Imagine living inside the royal court during such a period. You might walk into a room and not know who was loyal to whom. A person smiling at you might support a different political faction. A servant might have heard a rumor. A noble might be waiting for a political change. Everyone would be watching. Everyone would be listening. And everyone would be careful. This was not a peaceful environment. Yet at the same time, the Maja was still simply a painting. Perhaps it remained in one of Gada's private rooms. Perhaps people continued to see it as part of his collection. Perhaps the painting seemed completely disconnected from politics. But its owner was not disconnected from politics. And that would soon matter. In March 1808, the political crisis reached a major turning point. The events at Aranjuez led to the fall of God. The royal family was forced into a dramatic political crisis. God lost his position. The king, Charles IV, abdicated in favor of Ferdinand. The old political balance collapsed. For God, this was devastating. The man who had stood close to the king was suddenly vulnerable. His enemies had won, and his possessions became targets. Imagine the atmosphere around his residence. People are moving quickly. Doors open. Voices rise. Officials arrive. Objects are examined. Property is being taken. The private world that God had built is being broken apart. Paintings are no longer simply decorations. They are possessions belonging to a fallen political figure. And possessions belonging to a fallen political figure can become evidence of wealth, influence, and privilege. The Maja is caught in this moment. She has nothing to do with politics. She has never spoken. She has never chosen a side. But she belongs to God. That is enough to pull her into the story. Imagine the doors of God's private rooms being opened. People enter. Paintings are examined. Objects are listed. The privacy of the collection disappears. For years, the rooms had been controlled by their owner. Now other people control them. This is a profound change. A private collector can decide. This painting stays here. This one goes there. This room is for close friends. This room is private. But once a collection is seized, those decisions no longer belong to the owner. Officials decide. Inventories are created. Objects are moved. Paintings are studied. And the meaning of the collection changes. It is no longer simply a reflection of one man's taste. It becomes a record of his wealth. It becomes part of the political story. The Maja is now exposed. It can be seen by people who would never have been invited into God's private room. And someone notices it. Perhaps someone had already known about it. Perhaps someone had heard of it. But now it is impossible to ignore. A nude woman. A large painting. A private collection. A powerful political figure. And a society with strict moral expectations. The painting has entered a new world. An inventory sounds like a boring thing. A list. Names. Numbers. Descriptions. But inventories can become extremely important to historians. They tell us what existed, where it was, who owned it, and sometimes how people understood it. Imagine an official writing down the contents of a room. A table, a chair, a mirror, a portrait, another painting. Then the Maja. The official may not know how famous it will become. For the person writing the list, it is simply another object. A painting. Something that needs to be recorded. But centuries later, historians may study that document carefully. They may ask, when was the painting first recorded? Who owned it? Where was it kept? Was it displayed with another painting? What did people call it? These small records help reconstruct the life of an artwork. History is often built from details like this. Not from dramatic speeches. Not from famous battles. But from lists, receipts, letters, inventories, signatures, small pieces of paper. The people who created them probably did not imagine that future generations would care. But we do, because those little details help us see the past. At some point, the Maja became more than an object in a collection. It became a problem. The authorities were concerned about its subject. The nude figure was considered inappropriate. The painting was connected to questions of morality. And now, because it had entered official hands, those questions could not simply be ignored. The painting could no longer remain safely behind a private door. It had to be considered. What should happen to it? Should it be hidden? Should it be removed? Should the artist be identified? Should the owner be questioned? The answers were not simple. And behind the questions was the authority of the Inquisition. This is where the story becomes especially interesting. Because the painting was not merely being judged aesthetically. No one was asking only, is this a good painting? Is Goya talented? Is the composition balanced? Are the colors beautiful? Those questions belong to art criticism. The Inquisition was asking something different. Is this image morally acceptable? Why was it made? Who commissioned it? Who was supposed to see it? The difference between those questions is enormous. One is about art. The other is about authority. Let us slow down here. The word Inquisition can sound dramatic, but the real institution had a long and complicated history. It had existed for centuries. Its role changed over time. Its methods changed. Its power changed. By Goya's period, Europe was already experiencing new ideas about government and individual thought. But the Inquisition had not disappeared. Its existence was still important. People knew its authority. They knew that certain subjects could attract official attention. They knew that books could be examined. They knew that ideas could be questioned. And they knew that religious and moral boundaries mattered. For a wealthy person, the consequences of an investigation might be different from those faced by an ordinary person. Money and social connections could provide protection, but no one wanted unnecessary trouble. So imagine the moment when the painting came under scrutiny. There is no need to imagine shouting. There is no need for dramatic music. Instead, imagine paperwork, a report, a name, a painting, a question, a summons. That is often how power works. Quietly, through documents, through officials, through procedures. The painting is moved. The artist's name is written down. Questions are prepared. And slowly, the world around Goya begins to close in. Why question Goya? Because he was the painter. The canvas carried his work. The authorities wanted to know where it came from. And so the artist became part of the investigation. Imagine receiving a summons. You are told that you must appear. You know the institution involved. You know the subject. And you know that the painting has already been taken. You have lived with the knowledge that certain images can be controversial. But perhaps you believe this painting was safely private. Now it is not. Goya was already an established artist. He had a reputation. He had connections. He was not an unknown young painter. But being famous does not mean being completely free from authority. In fact, fame can sometimes make a person more visible. The authorities know who created the work. They know where to find him. They can ask questions. And Goya must decide how to respond. We should resist the temptation to invent a heroic speech. History does not give us one. Instead, we have something much quieter. A summons, a questioning, a record, and uncertainty. That is enough. Goya was now an older man. This matters. He was not the young artist who had first arrived in the capital. He had lived through decades. He had experienced success. He had experienced loss. His hearing had become severely impaired earlier in life. He had seen the royal court from the inside. He had seen Spain change. And now he was being asked to explain a painting from his earlier years. Imagine how strange that might feel. A person may spend years moving forward. Then something from the past returns. An old letter, an old friend, an old painting, an old decision. Suddenly, the past is standing in front of you again. For Goya, that past was painted on canvas. The woman in the Maja had not aged, but Goya had. The woman remained young. Goya had become an old man. The painting had remained still. History had moved around it. And now the painter had to answer for something he had created years earlier. The year was 1815. Goya was summoned before the Inquisition. The purpose was to question him about the paintings. He was expected to identify them as his. He was asked about their creation. He was asked about their purpose. And he was asked about the people involved. Imagine the walk toward the building. Perhaps Goya traveled by carriage. Perhaps he walked part of the way. We do not know. But we can imagine the city around him. Madrid had changed enormously since he first arrived. The streets were familiar, but they were also different. The political world had been shaken. War had passed through Spain. The French occupation had left scars. People had died. Families had been separated. Buildings had changed. Power had changed hands. And now, Goya was walking into another kind of old institution. The Inquisition. The door opens. He enters. The outside sounds become distant. Inside, the atmosphere is formal. Quiet. Serious. There are papers. There are officials. There are questions. And somewhere in that building is the story of a painting. A painting of a woman lying on a bed. A painting that had once been private. Now it has become an official matter. Imagine the first question. Did you paint this? Perhaps the answer is obvious. The painting is his. His style is there. His name is associated with it. But the authorities still need the answer. A formal investigation requires formal questions. The painting is presented. The artist identifies it. Then another question. Why did you paint it? This is more difficult. Because intention is complicated. An artist may paint something because a patron asked. Because the subject was fashionable. Because the artist wanted to experiment. Because the artist needed money. Because the artist liked the subject. Or because several of these reasons were true at once. Goya's answer is not preserved in a way that allows us to quote him confidently. So we cannot fill the silence with invented dialogue. Instead, imagine the room. A question. A pause. Another question. The scratch of a pen. The movement of paper. Perhaps a chair shifts. Perhaps the artist looks at the officials. Perhaps he looks down. We do not know. History has become quiet here. And that quietness is worth respecting. Another important question was, who requested the painting? This matters because commissions were normal in art. Artists often painted because someone paid them. If a wealthy person wanted a portrait, they hired an artist. If a church wanted an altarpiece, it hired an artist. If a palace wanted decorations, artists were commissioned. So the question was not strange. But in this case, the answer could matter. If the painting had been commissioned privately, then who had asked for it? Who wanted such an image? Who intended to see it? Was it made for a private room? Was it intended as a personal object? Was it connected with God? Was it connected with another person? These questions would become part of the mystery, and the answers could potentially change how people understood the painting. Yet the historical record remains incomplete. We can follow the painting's ownership. We can follow its later history. But we cannot reconstruct every private conversation. That is why the Maja remains partly mysterious. And eventually, our thoughts return to the woman. Who was she? The authorities may have wanted to know. Historians certainly want to know. Visitors wonder. Artists have wondered. Writers have wondered. But the painting remains silent. Perhaps the woman herself never knew how famous the painting would become. Perhaps she knew only that Goya was painting her. Perhaps she understood that it was a private commission. Perhaps she never saw the finished work. Perhaps she did. We cannot know. This uncertainty gives the painting a strange quality. She has no voice. She has no biography. She has no confirmed name. But she has survived. More than 200 years later, she is still one of the most recognizable figures in Spanish painting. The powerful men around her disappeared. God disappeared. The officials disappeared. The political factions disappeared. The world that created the painting disappeared. But she remained. After the questions, the painting still exists. It has not been destroyed. It has not vanished. It has survived another dangerous moment. And this is where we can pause. Imagine it resting quietly again. Perhaps not in the same room as before. Perhaps moved. Perhaps stored. Perhaps watched over by officials. But still there. The canvas has survived the political collapse of God. It has survived war. It has survived the investigation. It has survived the uncertainty surrounding its owner. And it has survived the questions about its morality. The woman still looks outward. The bed remains. The colors remain. The composition remains. And the years continue. Outside, Spain is changing again. The political world is moving. Goya's life is moving toward its final years. And the painting is moving toward its future. One day, it will no longer be a private curiosity. One day, people will study it. One day, visitors will stand in front of it. One day, the painting will become part of Spain's cultural identity. But that future is still ahead. For now, it is simply a painting that has survived. A quiet object in a noisy history. And perhaps that is the perfect place to end tonight's chapter. The room is dark. The officials have gone. The papers have been put away. The questions are finished for now. The city outside is quiet. A distant bell marks the hour. And the Maja remains. Still, silent, unchanged, waiting for the next chapter of her long journey. Good night. Rest for a little while. And when we continue, we will move deeper into the aftermath. We will follow Goya through the changing Spain around him. We will see how the painting slowly moves beyond the private world that first protected it. And we will begin to understand how a painting once treated as a problem could eventually become a treasure. The questions had ended, at least for the moment. The officials had their papers. The painting had been examined. Goya had answered what he could. And the great machinery of authority slowly moved on to other matters. But for Goya, the experience could not simply disappear. He was an old man now. The world around him had changed many times. Spain had passed through war. The French had entered the country. The royal family had been forced into exile. Political power had shifted. And now the old institutions were trying to restore their authority. Goya had lived through all of it. He had painted kings. He had painted queens. He had painted nobles. He had painted ordinary people. He had painted celebrations. He had painted suffering. And somewhere among all those works was the quiet woman lying on a bed. A painting that had survived. A painting that had caused questions. A painting whose true story was still not completely known. Perhaps Goya simply wanted to move forward. Artists often do. They create one work, then another, then another. The world may remember one painting, but the artist has already moved on. He is thinking about the next canvas, the next idea, the next image. The Maja belonged to the past, but the past was never completely gone. Let us step outside the artist's home for a moment. Madrid had changed. The years of French occupation had left deep marks on Spain. People had experienced shortages. Families had suffered. Buildings had been damaged. The country had been divided by politics. Some people had supported the French. Others had resisted. And many ordinary people had simply tried to survive. Now the French were gone. But peace did not immediately create a simple world. King Ferdinand VII returned. Many people welcomed him. They hoped for stability. They hoped that the old order would return. But politics remained complicated. The new ideas that had spread across Europe could not simply be erased. Questions about freedom, questions about government, questions about the role of the king, questions about religion, questions about censorship. These ideas continued to exist. Spain was trying to decide what kind of country it wanted to be. Goya watched this world carefully. He had already spent much of his life observing people. Now his observations became darker. He understood that official stories and ordinary experience were not always the same. A government might celebrate victory. A person in the street might remember hunger. A king might return triumphantly. A family might remember someone who never came home. History contains many versions of the same event. And Goya knew this very well. Ferdinand VII returned to Spain in 1814. The political atmosphere changed again. The monarchy was restored. Some of the liberal reforms introduced during the war years were rejected. The king wanted stronger royal authority. The old political order was returning. For people who supported absolute monarchy, this was comforting. For others, it was disappointing. The country remained divided. Goya had reasons to be cautious. He had served the monarchy, but he had also seen what political violence could do. He had seen the suffering of ordinary people. He had seen the consequences of war. And he had lived through the changing governments. The return of Ferdinand, therefore, did not simply mean a return to the past. The past itself had changed. You cannot live through a great war and become exactly the person you were before it. The same is true for countries. Spain was still Spain. Madrid was still Madrid. The churches were still there. The palaces were still there. The streets were still there. But the people had memories now. And memories change places. Goya's later life became increasingly private. His health was not perfect. His hearing remained severely damaged. He had already experienced serious illness earlier in life. He had lost friends. He had seen political uncertainty. And he was getting older. The world was becoming more difficult for him. Yet he continued to work. This is one of the remarkable things about his life. Age did not stop his curiosity. He continued to draw. He continued to paint. He continued to observe. His later works often feel very different from the elegant court portraits of his earlier career. They can be quiet. They can be strained. They can be deeply personal. They show an artist who had seen too much to remain satisfied with simple beauty. But tonight, we do not need to hurry into those darker works. Let us stay with the Maja, because the Maja belongs to another side of Goya, a side that could still be playful, a side that could still appreciate beauty, a side that could create a figure who simply rests and looks back at the viewer. The painting remains young. The painter is aging. This contrast is almost impossible to avoid. The woman on the canvas does not grow older. Goya does. Years pass quietly. One year becomes another. A person moves to a new home. A government changes. A king dies. A new generation grows up. And paintings continue to wait. This is one of the special things about art. A painting does not experience time in the same way we do. The person who painted it becomes old, then dies. The people who commissioned it die. The people who first saw it die. Their children grow old. Their grandchildren grow old. But the painting remains. Its colors may change slightly. Its surface may require care. Its frame may be replaced, but the basic image survives. The Maja has now passed beyond the lifetime of many of the people who knew its original story. That means the mystery becomes deeper. The farther we move from the beginning, the more difficult it becomes to recover private facts. A forgotten conversation cannot easily be reconstructed. A lost letter cannot always be replaced. A person who knew the truth may never have written it down. And so with time, uncertainty grows. There is something important we should remember. There are actually two famous paintings: the nude Maja and the clothed Maja. Both are by Goya. Both show a woman lying in a similar position. The clothed version shows her wearing clothes. The nude version does not. The similarity between the two paintings has created another mystery. Which came first? Why were there two? Were they designed to be seen together? Was one painted to cover the other? Were they made for the same owner? Did the viewer know about both? These questions have been discussed for generations. And the presence of the two paintings makes the story even more interesting. Imagine entering a room and seeing the clothed woman first. She is dressed. She looks directly at you. Then imagine that another painting exists nearby. The same pose, the same setting, but without clothing. The contrast would be striking. It would almost feel like a visual game. One image reveals. The other conceals. One gives the viewer a conventional portrait. The other challenges expectations. Perhaps the two were intended to be seen together. Perhaps they were not. But their existence gives us another clue about Goya's imagination. He was not simply copying one idea. He was exploring the same figure in two different ways. Let us spend a quiet moment with the clothed painting. She lies in almost the same position. Her head rests against cushions. Her arms are arranged similarly. Her eyes look toward us. But now she is dressed. The clothing changes everything. The viewer's relationship with the figure becomes different. The painting still feels intimate, but the sense of exposure is reduced. It is easier to imagine the clothed version hanging in a room. And perhaps this is exactly why the two paintings could work together. The viewer sees the same pose, but the meaning changes. This tells us something important about visual storytelling. A small change can completely alter a scene. The position of the body remains. The face remains. The background remains. but clothing changes the entire feeling. Goya understood this. He understood that a painting does not need movement to create a strong response. Sometimes a small difference is enough. There is a fascinating possibility connected with the two works. Perhaps the clothed Maja was designed to cover the nude Maja. Imagine a wealthy owner receiving visitors. The nude painting is behind another canvas. A guest enters. The clothed painting is visible. Everything appears respectable. Then, perhaps when the room becomes private, the outer painting can be moved. The hidden image appears. We cannot say with certainty that this was exactly how the paintings were displayed. But the possibility has fascinated historians. It also reminds us how different private art collections could be from modern museums. Today, we expect art to be openly displayed. We walk into a gallery. We see a painting. There are labels. There are lights. There are barriers. Everyone can look. But private collections work differently. Owners could control access. They could decide what guests saw. They could hide certain objects. They could reveal others. The meaning of an artwork could depend on who was in the room. That makes the original life of the Maja difficult to understand from a modern perspective. We are used to public museums. The Maja was born in a private world. Think about the difference between the first viewer and the modern viewer. The first viewer may have known the owner. They may have known the room. They may have known the social context. They may have known the rumors. They may have known the person who commissioned the painting. The modern viewer knows almost none of these things. Instead, we know the painting's later history. We know that Goya became famous. We know the painting survived. We know that the Inquisition examined it. We know it eventually became part of Spain's national collection. We know it is now considered one of the country's most important artworks. So we look at it differently. The original viewer may have thought, "Who is she? Why is this here? What does the owner want me to think?" The modern viewer may think, "This is Goya. This is one of the most famous paintings in Spain. It belongs to art history. The painting is the same, but the viewer has changed." And this is one of the quiet mysteries of museums. A painting can remain unchanged, while its meaning changes again and again. As the 19th century continued, Europe entered a new age. Museums became increasingly important. Art that had once belonged to kings and aristocrats was gradually becoming part of public cultural life. People began to think differently about famous artworks. Paintings were not only possessions. They were part of national heritage. They represented history. They represented culture. They could educate the public. And they could become symbols of a country. Spain was no exception. The Maja was slowly moving toward this new world. It was no longer only Gaudi's private painting. It was no longer simply a controversial nude. It was becoming part of the story of Spanish art. The woman who had once been hidden from most people was gradually moving toward public view. The private room was becoming a museum, and the quiet painting was preparing for a much larger audience. In his final years, Goya eventually left Spain. He moved to France. He settled in Bordeaux. This was another quiet but important change. The artist who had spent so much of his life in Spain was now living elsewhere. He was older. His hearing remained poor, but he continued to create. Bordeaux became his final home. Imagine the journey. A man who had spent decades in Madrid, now crossing the border. The Spanish landscapes slowly disappear behind him. New roads appear. New towns. New voices. New surroundings. He had seen Spain change many times. Now he was leaving it. Perhaps he thought about his life. The royal court. The palaces. The people he had painted. The wars. The political changes. The friends he had lost. The paintings he had created. And somewhere in Spain, the Maja remained. The painting had outlived many of the people who had been part of its early story. And it would outlive Goya too. Goya's final years were spent away from the country that had made him famous. Yet he continued to work. He drew. He painted. He experimented. His final works show that his curiosity had not disappeared. Even late in life, he could still observe the world. He could still create. He could still look at ordinary things and find something worth recording. Then in 1828, Goya died in Bordeaux. He was 82 years old. The artist was gone. The woman on the canvas remained. This simple contrast carries enormous weight. Goya's body had aged. His hands had aged. His hearing had failed. His life had changed. But the Maja remained almost exactly as it had been when he painted it. The artist became history. His painting became part of history. And the mystery became larger. Because now the person who could have explained the painting was gone. Whatever Goya knew about the identity of the woman, whatever he knew about the commission, whatever private stories existed, they became harder to recover. The door had closed, and the painting remained behind it. Now imagine her again, not as a mystery, not as a scandal, not as a symbol, simply as a painted woman. She lies quietly. Her head rests against the cushions. Her body follows the gentle curve of the bed. Her eyes meet the viewer. There is no movement, no sound, no explanation. She does not tell us who she is. Perhaps she never intended to. Perhaps the identity was never important. Perhaps Goya was more interested in the image itself. A woman, a room, a moment, a gaze, a painting, and perhaps that is enough. We spend so much time trying to name people, trying to identify them, trying to understand their relationships. But sometimes a work of art survives precisely because it allows us to wonder. The unanswered question becomes part of the artwork. Who was she? We may never know. And that is all right. Let us return to the room. The room is quiet. The painting hangs on the wall. Outside, Madrid continues. People walk. Carriages move. Shops open. Church bells ring. Children grow older. The seasons change. Rain falls. Summer arrives. Winter returns. The painting watches nothing. It simply remains. Years pass. The room changes. The people who enter change. The owners change. The political world changes. But the woman remains. This is why paintings can feel almost magical. They do not actually stop time, but they preserve a moment. Goya preserved this particular moment. A woman lying quietly, looking outward, forever young, forever still. And perhaps tonight that is enough. We do not need to solve every mystery. We do not need to know every name. We do not need to know every conversation. We can simply let the painting exist. As the night grows quiet, we can imagine the old room becoming dark. The candles burn low. The footsteps fade. The last conversation ends. The door closes, and the painting remains alone, waiting for morning, waiting for another visitor, waiting for another century, waiting for us. Good night. Rest now. The story of the Maja is not finished. The painter has gone. The original owner has gone. The royal court has changed. The old political world has disappeared. But the painting is still moving forward through history. And in the next chapter, we will follow that journey into the museum age. We will see how the Maja slowly became public, how people began to study it, how its identity became a subject of endless discussion, and how a once private painting eventually became one of the most famous images in Spanish art. For now, let the room become quiet. Let the candles fade, and let the Maja rest beneath the soft darkness of another night. The years continued to pass. Slowly, quietly, one year became another, and the world around the Maja continued to change. The old royal court was becoming part of history. The people who had known Manuel God were growing older. The people who had remembered the original controversy were disappearing, and the painting itself was moving farther away from its private beginning. At first, it had belonged to a powerful man. It had rested inside a private collection. Only a small circle of people could see it. Then politics had opened the doors. Officials had examined it. The Inquisition had asked questions. Goya had been questioned. And now the painting was beginning to enter another kind of life. A public life. A museum life. A life in which strangers could stand before it. A life in which scholars could write about it. A life in which ordinary people could look at it without knowing anything about the old rooms in which it had once hung. This was a major change. The woman on the bed was no longer only someone's private possession. She was becoming part of a nation's cultural memory. And that change would slowly transform the way people understood her. Let us imagine Madrid during the 19th century. The city is changing. New buildings appear. Old streets become busier. More newspapers circulate. People read more widely. Public institutions become more important. Art begins to reach audiences that were once excluded from private collections. The idea of a national museum becomes increasingly powerful. A museum is different from a palace. A palace belongs to a ruler. A private collection belongs to an individual. But a national museum belongs, in a symbolic sense, to everyone. The painting is no longer simply there because a wealthy person likes it. It is there because the nation considers it valuable. This changes the relationship between the viewer and the artwork. Imagine entering a museum for the first time. Perhaps you have never been inside a palace. Perhaps you have never met an aristocrat. Perhaps you have never seen an important painting. You walk through the doors. The rooms are quiet. People speak softly. Paintings cover the walls. There are portraits of kings, religious scenes, landscapes, historical paintings, and then you see Goya. You approach. The Maja is there. For the first time, a person who has no connection to the royal court can stand before the woman. No invitation is required. No aristocratic title is required. No private friendship is required. You simply enter. And look, this is the beginning of a new kind of relationship between the painting and the public. Think about one visitor. Perhaps she is a young woman from Madrid. She has heard the name Goya. Perhaps she has seen other paintings by him. But she has never seen the Maja. She walks slowly through the gallery. Her shoes make a quiet sound against the floor. She looks at one painting, then another. She turns a corner, and there she is. The Maja. The visitor stops. For a few seconds, she says nothing. She simply looks. The painting is larger than she expected. The woman seems calm. The gaze is direct. The room around the painting is quiet. Perhaps the visitor feels surprised. Perhaps curious. Perhaps embarrassed. Perhaps simply interested. She may wonder who the woman was. She may wonder who painted her. She may wonder why the painting became famous. Then she walks away. Another visitor arrives. Then another. And another. This is how a painting slowly becomes public. Not through one dramatic event, but through thousands of small encounters. One person looks. Then another. Then another. Over many years. Once a painting enters a museum, another world appears around it. Catalogs are written. Measurements are recorded. Restorers examine the surface. Artists study it. Students copy it. Historians debate it. Curators decide where it should hang. Visitors ask questions. And slowly, a painting begins to develop an academic life. The Maja becomes a subject of study. People want to know when Goya painted it. They want to know who commissioned it. They want to know who the model was. They want to know why it was made. They want to know why there are two Majas. They want to know how the painting survived. And each question produces another question. This is how art history grows. A single painting can generate decades of discussion, sometimes centuries. The more famous a painting becomes, the more people want to explain it. And the more people try to explain it, the more theories appear. Some are careful. Some are imaginative. Some are poorly supported. And some become famous simply because they are interesting. The Maja would experience all of these. The question of the woman's identity never completely disappeared. In fact, it became even more interesting. The painting had now reached a wider audience. People could see it. They could compare it with other portraits. They could study the face. They could look at the Duchess of Alba. They could look at Pepita Tudo. They could compare clothing. They could compare hairstyles. They could compare facial features. And slowly, the mystery became part of the painting's identity. It was no longer simply, Goya painted a nude woman. It became, who was Goya's woman? This small change in wording is important. The question makes the painting personal. A viewer begins to imagine a real person behind the image. Perhaps she had a family. Perhaps she had a home. Perhaps she walked through Madrid. Perhaps she knew Goya. Perhaps she knew God. Perhaps she was connected with the court. Or perhaps she was simply a model whose name was never recorded. We do not know. But the desire to know is powerful. People dislike empty spaces in history. When a fact is missing, the human mind naturally tries to fill it. And so theories grow. The Duchess of Alba became one of the strongest possibilities in the public imagination. Her connection with Goya was real. He had painted her. There were portraits. There were records. There was a social relationship between the artist and the aristocratic family. And people noticed similarities. The face of the Maja seemed familiar. The expression seemed familiar. The body was different, but the face encouraged speculation. Perhaps it was her. Perhaps Goya had painted the Duchess privately. Perhaps the painting was a secret portrait. Perhaps there had been a romantic relationship. These ideas became popular. But again, we should slow down. History does not become fact simply because a story is repeated. There is no clear proof that the Duchess was the model for the nude Maja. The possibility remains interesting. But possibility is not certainty. This is an important lesson in studying famous historical objects. The most interesting story is not always the most accurate story. Sometimes the truth is less dramatic, and sometimes we simply do not know. We can look at the confirmed portraits instead. Goya did paint the Duchess of Alba. In these portraits, we can see how he represented her. She has presence. She appears confident. Her clothing identifies her social position. Her posture communicates status. She is not presented as an anonymous woman. She is clearly an aristocrat. This makes the comparison with the Maja interesting. The Duchess is recognizable because of her identity. The Maja is memorable because of her anonymity. One woman has a name. The other does not. One belongs to a family with a long history. The other seems to belong only to the moment in which she was painted. One stands inside the world of aristocratic status. The other lies quietly on a bed. And yet, some viewers continue to feel that the two women are connected. Perhaps they are. Perhaps they are not. The mystery survives because the evidence does not completely close the door. Chapter 72, Pepita Tudo and the Private World. The name Pepita Tudo also remains connected with the story. She was associated with God. That connection makes her an obvious candidate in the eyes of later writers. If God owned the painting, if Pepita was close to God, if the painting was intended for a private setting, then perhaps she was the model. It is a simple line of reasoning. But simple reasoning does not always produce historical certainty. There are gaps. Documents are missing. Statements are unclear. And later stories may have changed the way earlier events were remembered. Perhaps Pepita really was the model. Perhaps she was not. Perhaps the identity mattered to Gado, but was never written down. Perhaps the painting was not intended as a portrait at all. Again, we return to the same quiet answer. We do not know, and we can allow the mystery to remain. There is another small detail worth understanding. The word Maja refers to a fashionable woman from the lower or middle social world of 18th century and early 19th century Madrid. A Maja was associated with a certain style, a certain way of dressing, a certain attitude, a certain urban culture. The term is not exactly the same as saying noblewoman. That difference matters. Goya was not simply giving the woman a royal identity. The title placed her within a recognizable Spanish cultural world. The Maja was not presented as a goddess from ancient mythology. She was not Venus. She was not a classical figure from some distant story. She was a woman, a Spanish woman, a woman connected, at least in name, with everyday Madrid culture. This makes the painting feel more immediate. The viewer does not need to know Greek mythology. There is no complicated story. There is only the woman, the room, the bed, the gaze, and the name, Maja, a small word, but a word that connects the painting to a particular place. Madrid, Spain, the world Goya knew. One reason the Maja continues to attract attention is that it feels strangely direct. Even now, more than 2 centuries later, the woman looks toward us. She does not look away. She does not pretend the viewer is absent. She seems aware that someone is looking. That direct gaze creates a relationship. In many earlier paintings, the nude female body had been presented through mythology. The viewer was asked to think about Venus or another goddess. The nude could be explained through a story. Goya did not need such a story. His woman is simply there. She looks back. This can feel surprisingly modern. The painting does not need an elaborate excuse. It presents the human figure directly. And perhaps that is one reason it remains so memorable. A viewer from the early 19th century could respond to it. A viewer from the 20th century could respond to it. And a viewer today can still stand before it and feel that direct connection. The technology has changed. The buildings have changed. The clothes have changed. But the human experience of looking has not changed very much. Let us imagine standing in front of it now. You are in a museum. There are people around you. But the room is quiet. You take a few steps forward. You look at the painting. At first, you see the whole image. Then you notice the face, the eyes, the slight expression, the cushions, the white sheets, the darker background, the soft contrast between the body and the surrounding space. You remain there. A few seconds pass, then perhaps a minute. The painting does not change, but your attention changes. At first you saw a nude. Then you saw a woman. Then you began to notice the room. Then the expression. Then the history. And suddenly, the painting becomes more than an image. It becomes a doorway. Behind it are centuries. Behind it are questions. Behind it are people. Behind it are rooms that no longer exist. And behind all of that is Goya, an old man in another country, a painter who once stood before a blank canvas. Imagine Goya before the painting began. There is a blank surface. The room is quiet. His materials are ready. The first mark has not yet been made. There is no Maja. There is only an empty canvas. Then the artist begins. A line, another line, a shape, a shadow. The figure slowly appears. The face develops. The bed takes form. The room becomes visible. Layer by layer, the painting comes into existence. At that moment, nobody knows what it will become. Nobody knows that it will survive for centuries. Nobody knows that historians will argue about it. Nobody knows that millions of people will eventually see it. For Goya, it is simply a painting in progress. This is true of much of history. The people who create important things rarely know how important those things will become. A letter is written. A building is constructed. A painting is painted. A decision is made. A child is born. And nobody knows what the future will do with it. The Maja was simply one painting. Then history gave it a much larger life. Many paintings from Goya's time have disappeared. Some were damaged. Some were destroyed. Some were lost. Some were painted over. Some were forgotten. Others survive only in old records. The Maja survived. That alone is remarkable. It survived political changes. It survived private ownership. It survived official examination. It survived the passing of its painter. It survived the 19th century. And it continued into the modern world. Survival is often partly luck. A building may survive because it was never bombed. A book may survive because someone kept it in a dry room. A painting may survive because its owners valued it. History is full of such accidents. We often imagine that famous objects were always destined to survive. But they were not. The Maja could have disappeared. It could have been damaged beyond repair. It could have been hidden. It could have been sold elsewhere. It could have been forgotten. Instead, it survived. And because it survived, we can still look at it. Eventually, the painting found a more stable place in the public world of Spanish art. The museum became its new home. This is an interesting idea. A painting can have several homes. Its first home may be a private room. Its second home may be a palace. Its third home may be a museum. Each home changes the meaning slightly. The private room says, "This belongs to someone." The palace says, "This belongs to a powerful world." The museum says, "This belongs to history." And perhaps in a larger sense, it belongs to everyone. A visitor from Madrid can see it. A visitor from another part of Spain can see it. A traveler from another country can see it. The painting no longer belongs only to one person. It belongs to the public imagination. And that is a powerful transformation. By now, the world in which the Maja was created had almost completely disappeared. The old royal court was gone. God was gone. Goya was gone. The Duchess was gone. Pepita Tudo was gone. The officials who examined the painting were gone. The rooms where the painting had once hung had changed. The streets had changed. The fashions had changed. The political system had changed. Even the meaning of the word Maja had changed. But the woman remained. There is something almost peaceful about that. The people who once argued about the painting could no longer argue. The people who once wanted to hide it were gone. The people who wanted to know the model's identity were gone. Their voices had faded. Only the image remained. Perhaps this is why museums can feel so quiet. They contain the remains of many arguments. But the arguments themselves are gone. Only the objects remain. And so we return one final time to her. She is lying on the bed. Her head rests against the cushions. Her arms are relaxed. Her eyes are open. She looks toward us. But she never speaks. She does not tell us her name. She does not tell us why she posed. She does not tell us what she thought of Goya. She does not tell us what she thought of God. She does not tell us whether she ever knew about the Inquisition. She does not tell us whether she ever imagined that strangers would stare at her 200 years later. She says nothing. And yet perhaps that silence is part of her power. We are forced to do the talking. We create theories. We ask questions. We search through archives. We compare faces. We study documents. We examine the paint. We argue about dates. We debate identities. But the painting simply remains. Quiet, patient, still, as though it has all the time in the world. And perhaps it does, because the woman has already survived the people who painted her world. She has survived the king, the queen, the minister, the aristocrat, the artist, the officials, the wars, the political arguments, the changing governments. And now she waits for another generation, another visitor, another pair of eyes, another quiet evening in a museum. Outside, Madrid continues to breathe. Cars pass through streets that once carried horses. Electric lights shine where candles once burned. People walk quickly. Phones glow in their hands. The modern city surrounds the old painting. And still behind museum walls, the Maja rests. A woman from another century. A face from another world. A mystery that never completely disappears. The museum becomes quiet. The last visitors leave. The doors close. The lights become softer. And the painting remains. Tomorrow, the doors will open again. People will enter. They will walk through the galleries. And eventually, someone will stop in front of Goya's woman. They will look. And for a brief moment, the centuries will become very close. The past will meet the present. The painter will meet the viewer. And the woman will look back. Good night. Let the museum become silent now. Let the footsteps fade. Let the city grow distant. And let the Maja rest in the quiet darkness. Her story will continue. But there is no need to hurry. History has already waited more than 200 years. It can wait until morning.